Fear by Raymond Carver.
Fear of seeing a police car pull into the drive.
Fear of falling asleep at night.
Fear of not falling asleep.
Fear of the past rising up.
Fear of the present taking flight.
Fear of the telephone that rings in the dead of night.
Fear of electrical storms.
Fear of the cleaning woman who has a spot on her cheek. Fear of dogs I've been told won't bite.
Fear of anxiety. Fear of having to identify the body of a dead friend.
Fear of running out of money.
Fear of having too much, though people will not believe this.
Fear of psychological profiles.
There are battles one cannot see. There are battles unidentified by others, hidden deep in the pulsing flames of the soul. Yet there are battles that harbor the most profound potential to define the words and actions expanding across an entire race. Internally, disputes between forces may breed spontaneous, unavoidable actions. Societal influences paired with innate instincts trigger this war deep inside the mind, catalyzing mental dissonance. Emotions unquestionably add inconsistency to the perpetual psychological struggle. Founded on reality, the starkly embedded consciousness juxtaposes the horrifying, omnipresent unconsciousness. Principles and thoughts intertwine to protect tenets and expectations to abide by, once again illustrating a clash of ideas. Naturalism appeals to the subconscious, while the awakened mind savors the process of an individual, free agent, independent from fate. These raw emotions of the unconscious, based in the tainted mentality, are illuminated through Bigger Thomas, the driving psychological character in Richard Wright's Native Son. Animalism, in unison with naturalism, forges unconscious thoughts rooted in external violence. Chained by the pertinent nature of race, Bigger becomes both aware of inferiority, yet remains helpless to enact change. Bigger's fluctuating, fear-driven journey parallels the battles of consciousness and unconsciousness.
Erring in insistently existential approach shapes protagonist Bigger Thomas's newfound sense of power, which develops his self-depreciating consciousness, a force Wright pits against deterministically unconscious motives and shadowed animalism, surrounding acknowledgement of racial inferiority, channeling the inner monologue that drives an ongoing duel culminating in the demise of Bigger's psyche.
Triggered by Mary Dalton's unforeseen murder, Bigger undergoes a transformation granting a newfound sense of existential control that ignites the drive to mold his own future. Bigger's mentality in flight shifts drastically from the harmful uncertainty to confidence that he could tell them anything he wanted. The silently persistent urge to take the streetcar and get the money from Bessie and leave town repeatedly batters Bigger's conscience. Flight. Get out. Now. These fear-induced pleadings pale in the face of an even more dominant sense of pride for what Bigger has accomplished. As long as he could decide just when and where he would run to, he need not be afraid. Abolishing fright from Bigger's clouded state of judgment, what remains serves as the existential force within flight. Harboring the haunting knowledge that he has accomplished the murder of a far superior, far wealthier, and far more intelligent white woman was the first time in his life he had had anything that others could not take from him. This profound realization that Bigger possesses some semblance of control over his own destiny lessens the role of his deeper and darker subconscious. Bigger can live. Now able to steer the plot of his own existence, he inadvertently subscribes to the mantra of an existentialist, belief that he had killed a white girl, and such a happening overcame his desolate role as a black man begets free will. Society's wan blindness for Bigger's entire race allows him to seemingly escape the crime. Claiming that Mrs. Dalton had not known he was in the room with her, it would have been the last thing she would have thought of. Formulates Bigger's sense of invincibility thanks to race. Using racial typecasts to his advantage, he assumes a role of innocence hidden within the confines of his presumably timid race. Bigger yearns to set in motion his newfound control, knowing what could they do about it. His realization comes about just as he contrived the outcome of the murder. Bigger Bigger can craft the rest of his being. He had done this, he had brought this all about. In all his life, these 2 murders were the most meaningful things that had ever happened to him. His fear-ridden life transforms into liberating freedom. Recognizing that he had murdered and had created a new life for himself gives Bigger Thomas the much-needed awareness that sailing far above the bulk of guilt and shame, he grasps the chance to lead his own path, finally allowing himself to accept that it was something that was all his own. Conscious freedom, in the end, bears no weight when placed against presiding unconscious.
Wright illuminates the mental processes of Bigger to reveal the instinctually primitive drives evidenced by naturalistic impulses seen primarily through animalism and sexual motives of the id, advancing the unconscious realm of Bigger Thomas himself. Actions and thoughts associate the protagonist, Bigger, with animal tendencies, further dehumanizing the blacks and fueling the racism fire. Throughout the rape scene in Flight, Bigger repeatedly mentions about having no choice, no alternative to raping Bessie. He was feeling bad about how she would feel, but he could not help it now. Claiming the absence of choice, Bigger justifies not only this rape, but also 2 murders through a mindset that he is forced to commit these crimes. In the moment, Bigger's breath swelled deep in his lungs, and he flexed his muscles, trying to impose his will over his body. Even beyond this rape, a sense of numbness captivates Bigger's body, a clear indication of the psychological id spreading into external action. Mary Dalton's murder was predestined as a result of an omnipresent hate towards whites, as Bigger operates solely on instinctual, crude emotions that suppress realism. So deeply had he pushed it all back down into him that it was not until now that its real meaning came back. They would say he had raped her, and there would be no way to prove he had not. In the same manner that Freud's idea of id manipulates Bigger into more of an animal than a human being, a sexual hunger lingers in the depths of the mind. Burning inside him was the hate for whites, including Mary, and as Bigger kisses Mary's intoxicated body, he searches for a remedy to the racial loathing. She was beautiful, slender, with an air that made him feel that she did not hate him with the hate of other white people. Quickly juxtaposing these raw emotions, however, is the sexual lust for Bessie. Replacing the fearful and shameful sexual desires of Mary, Bigger's primitive craving for Bessie unveils not only a further sense of the id, but also a concrete presence of psychological animalism becoming physical action. The shadowed layers of Bigger's id instinctually yearn for sexual control. He wished he could clench his fist and swing his arm and blot out, kill, sweep away the Bessie on Bessie's face and leave the other helpless and yielding before him. Searching for opportunities to assert dominance, animalistic impulses strive to internally eradicate shameful situations or people. Going as far as comparing Mary to Bessie, he placed his hands on her breast just as he had placed them on Mary's last night, and he was thinking of that while he kissed her. By defeating the moral ego and superego, the profane id forges grotesque, savage thoughts that translate into sexual acts. These unconscious instincts remain the primary reason behind Bigger's hopeless reality.
Forced to confront his bleak reality, Bigger encompasses racial prejudice structured within society to express hopeless determinism in recognizing inevitable suffering, which prompts a fateful psychological surrender. Bigger has become captive to his race, allowing it to drive who he is and how he allows others to view him. In any given situation, he reverts back to acting how a stereotypical black man would. Bigger wants to live up to those expectations and become the individual the white society fears so much. All his life, he had been knowing that sooner or later something like this would come to him, and now, here it was. He had always felt outside the white world, and now it was true. It made things simple. Bigger was finally realizing that he was not a part of the white society, that the world around him did not intend to support the African American race. In understanding this fact, Bigger lost the confidence and hope for the future he had gained while avoiding these truths. The idea of determinism is rooted in one's mind from birth, childhood, adolescence, and adulthood, pivot around a central societal structure that labels people with manufactured destinies. Bigger's confession of, for all his life, he had felt that things had been happening to him that should have gone into them. but only after he had acted upon feelings which he had had for years would the papers carry the story. His story illuminates not only an early onset of deterministic ideals, but the massive influence present in the minds of society. Bigger had already murdered Mary before even carrying her upstairs.
Bigger had already raped Bessie before Ernie's kitchen shack. Bigger had already become a criminal even before he left his apartment. Shame manipulates this protagonist, and he remains perpetually conscious of his skin color, catalyzed by the presence of whites. Displayed in the scene between Jan, Mary, and Bigger inside Ernie's, Bigger ponders what the fellow blacks are thinking about him as Bigger dines with two young communistic white people. Who are those white folks Bigger's hanging out with? Due to Bigger's race, he was destined to live in a rat-infested room, destined to murder, destined to rape, and destined to be executed. All these fateful events are built into society, translated to Bigger throughout his life. The lack of hope can be seen in the midst of the hunt for Bigger, as he realizes there is no option of freedom. It would seem that an army was thundering up the stairs. There was nowhere he could run to now. Either they caught him or they did not. Similar to how determinism suffocates hope, this unconscious and conscious idea reigns over others. In the sense of the unconscious, Bigger, and everyone else for that matter, remain inadequate to change the color of their skin. Despite this unconscious inability, the protagonist proves to be consciously aware of determinism and the fact that he acknowledges societal expectations. Though Mary Dalton was not raped, white and black society expects Bigger to commit such an action, which is eventually seen by the murderer himself. The variances between reality and racial-based stereotypes of determinism are alive in the consciousness. It's in this awareness that triggers a lonesome, purposeless life, catalyzed inner fear and turmoil.
Within the repressed unconscious of Bigger, shame prevails as an underlying presence, defining contrived personas and emphasizing individualized guilt evidenced by distraught dreams. Bigger believes to have gained copious amounts of power over the Daltons simply because he has done something no one thought he was capable of. This sense of power is false due to the continued use of his persona. While talking to Peggy the morning after the murder, he feels as though they are more so equals rather than him holding a lower status because of the color of his skin. This feeling juxtaposes how he acts around her. Yes'm, no'm, and ma'am are all used while Bigger is having a conversation with the woman whom he feels equal to. He walks around the house like the color of his skin doesn't make him stand out. He felt confident. Bigger built himself up enough to believe that he would never be suspected because he was using another persona. The sheepishly innocent black boy only trying to work hard to support his family. With his newfound confidence, he was able to consciously point out the differences between himself and Mrs. Dalton. She was white and he was black. He was safe, yes. Finally, it was a situation where his blackness would not be the reason of his downfall, but rather the potential breaking of his psychological persona. Because Bigger has been living in his persona for his whole life, acting presentable around white folk, he has no reason to believe that he would not be able to pull it off. Even with Bigger's recently developed confidence, he remains terrified of the white man and what he might do if he discovers his secret. When confronted by Britain, panic rose in Bigger. This fear rising up in him comes from his subconscious, the same place as his persona. It is difficult to know whether Bigger is remaining committed to the part or if he has abandoned all his false hope with the possibility of being caught. His assurance in himself is suddenly brought back to life as Bigger restores faith in the furnace, believing it has burned all the evidence. Thomas's role as an innocent black worker remains as he continuously shows respect and fear for Britain as he refers to him as Mr. and answers all his questions truthfully as he is able to. Yes, sir, I am telling the truth. I just started to work here last night. I ain't done nothing. I just did what they told me to do. To fully invest into the role of the innocent black worker, Bigger uses his lack of education to sound and look as though he would never do anything to bite the hand that feeds him. He plants the seeds of innocence in Britain's and the Daltons' minds and allows it to flourish as he feeds it by acting as a trustworthy and honest worker. In the way that his persona acts to cover up his true self, Bigger's dreams work to reveal those true feelings of fear and guilt. his own head lying with a black face and half-closed eyes, and lips parted with white teeth showing, and hair wet with blood. Though the extent of his actions has not yet reached his conscious mind, his unconscious is using every mode of communication to push Bigger's true emotions to the surface. Because he has allowed his subconscious mind to take over, giving up all control and resorting to instinctual actions, he cannot knowingly understand the full extent of his guilt.
Fear of being late and fear of arriving before anyone else.
Fear of my children's handwriting on envelopes.
Fear they'll die before I do, and I'll feel guilty.
Fear of having to live with my mother in her old age and mine.
Fear of confusion.
Fear this day will end on an unhappy note.
Fear of waking up to find you gone.
Fear of not loving, and fear of not loving enough.
Fear that what I love will prove lethal to those I love.
Fear of death.
Fear of living too long.
Fear of death.
I've said that.